The Baroque era extends from roughly 1600 until around 1750. You will remember that the Romantic era was known for highly emotional music, and the Classical era featured more restrained expression. Historically, expressiveness swings back and forth like a pendulum, and during the Baroque, the pendulum was back on the highly emotional side. However, Baroque emotionalism was accomplished in a different way than during the Romantic era. Music from the Romantic era tried to show emotional transformation and sometimes included sudden, surprising changes in mood. Baroque era composers tended to write a single emotion at a time, so one movement would show one emotion, and then after a pause, the next movement would have a different mood. We've already talked about one important characteristic of Baroque music, the basso continuo. This was the rhythm section of the era. Where we might expect to see an electric bass in most bands today, music in the Baroque usually included a cello, bassoon, or viola da gamba to play the bass line. We often see a rhythm guitar or a piano to play the chords, but the piano was brand new during the Baroque era and would not become established until the Classical. Instead, the keyboard instrument of choice during this era was the harpsichord. Inside the piano, the strings are hit by small wooden hammers. By contrast, inside a harpsichord, each string has a device much like a guitar pick called a plectrum that would pluck the string when the appropriate key was pressed. The harpsichord was ubiquitous throughout the Baroque era. Another characteristic of Baroque music is common to all artwork from the Baroque era. Look at this church, built between 1626 and 1650. Notice how every single surface is decorated in some way. Very ornate decoration, wherever possible, was a feature of the Baroque era style. You may have heard this very famous minuet in G by Christian Petzold. It's a very popular assignment for kids who are just learning how to play the piano. Here's the same piece as performed by an expert in Baroque style. Notice how she ornaments the melody rather than letting the notes stand unadorned. This idea of ornate music goes beyond just decorating a simple melody. In modern music, we've gotten used to a primary melody line that's supported by a subservient harmony part. During the Baroque era, it was just as common to have 2, 3, 4, or even more independent melodic lines, which were all equally important. When played simultaneously, these melody lines together created the harmony. This style of writing is called polyphony. The Baroque era was the first time in history when purely instrumental music became popular in a widespread way across Europe. So let's take a minute to talk about the instrumental structures that composers used. One of the more important applications of polyphony from the Baroque period is a form called the fugue. A fugue is based on a main theme called a subject. Each independent melodic line begins by playing that subject, though not always at the same pitch level. Then for the rest of the piece, the composer explores different ways of playing that subject, perhaps playing it backward, upside down, twice as fast, or some combination of these. One of the most popular instrumental forms to this day is the concerto, in which the music is written to feature one musician with the orchestra playing a supporting role. This is a great opportunity for a musician to demonstrate his or her technical prowess. One of the best-known concerto composers was a Baroque violinist named Antonio Vivaldi. He taught at an orphanage for girls, and during this time period, women were not allowed to leave the orphanage, even as adults, unless they got married. So the orphanage was trying to teach social graces that would be beneficial in attracting a husband, including the ability to play music. Vivaldi wrote at least 27 concertos to feature his advanced students. Today he is best remembered for a set of violin concertos which musically depict the four seasons. Currently, the predominant type of large piece for large ensemble without a soloist is the symphony, but that form was developed by Haydn in the classical era and didn't yet exist in the Baroque. Instead, composers used a structure called the dance suite. Dance suites typically had more movements than the standard four in a symphony. They would start with an overture, often in the French style just to be fashionable, and then there would be a collection of short movements modeled after specific types of popular dances. Usually these works were not intended to actually accompany dancers, but rather just use the style of that music as a model. Music from the Baroque era tended to be highly emotional, with one clear emotion per section of music. The harpsichord was very popular during the Baroque era, but it fell out of fashion in the classical era, so music using the harpsichord is almost certainly from the Baroque era. The harpsichord was often used as part of a basso continuo group. The melodic instruments played highly decorated melodies, and complexity permeated the music with intricate polyphony.